Hey guys, tonight we're floating back into the 19th century. So go ahead, dim the lights, grab a blanket, maybe pretend you're in a creaky old four-poster bed with curtains that look like they haven't been washed since Napoleon was relevant. Because tonight we're talking about the Victorians, and specifically how they wound down for the night. Spoiler, there was a lot of ritual, a lot of nonsense, and plenty of things that would make modern people scratch their heads and say, really? That's what you called self-care? Now, before we start dunking on them, let's remember Victorian nights were dark. Like actually dark. No electricity, no glowing phone screen to scroll through at 2 a.m., just lamps, candles, and if you were poor, maybe nothing but the moonlight. Imagine walking into your bedroom and not tripping over your dog because you could actually see. Yeah, that wasn't guaranteed in 1850. Darkness was heavy, which kind of sets the stage for why their whole bedtime prep was such a thing. So let's slip into our slippers and quietly shuffle into the 1800s bedroom. First, the bed itself. Victorians were absolutely obsessed with beds. The bigger, the heavier, the more curtains dangling off it, the better. If you were upper class, your bed wasn't just a bed. It was like the centerpiece of your identity. 4 posts, velvet curtains, a mountain of pillows that made the bed look like an upholstery showroom exploded. You didn't just go to bed, you performed bed. And here's the kicker. People were afraid of drafts. Like aggressively afraid. Cold air sneaking into the body at night was seen as the highway to illness. So these canopy curtains weren't just for drama, they were basically a Victorian attempt at a biohazard barrier. Wrap yourself up, shut out the evil night air, and congratulations, you've survived another evening without catching pneumonia. Or so they thought. Meanwhile, middle-class Victorians were also splurging on their beds. Iron frames became a thing mid-century, mostly because people finally realized wood harbored bed bugs like it was Airbnb for insects. Iron was marketed as hygienic. Of course, it didn't actually prevent bugs entirely, but hey, points for trying. And then there was the mattress situation. If you were fancy, horsehair stuffed into linen was your firm support. If you weren't fancy, you basically got a sack of straw. Which, to be fair, is still more eco-friendly than whatever memory foam concoction we're sleeping on now. Now, before the Victorians even got to bed, they had a whole checklist. Think of it like their version of a bedtime routine app, but instead of turn on white noise machine, it was boil water so you don't freeze to death. Number 1, lighting. You didn't just stroll into bed with the lights off. You had to blow out candles or turn down the gas lamps. And if you've ever tried to blow out a candle without dripping wax everywhere, imagine doing that while wearing sleeves the size of sofa cushions. That's the Victorian vibe. There was always a small but non-zero chance of setting yourself on fire during your nighttime routine. Number 2, chamber pots. Yeah, you weren't getting up at 2 a.m. to stumble down 3 flights of stairs to the outside privy. You had your own porcelain pot, daintily painted with flowers if you were upper class, shoved under the bed. Some people even had entire little cabinets just designed to hide the pot. Because nothing says romantic evening like ornate furniture built specifically to conceal your pee. And don't forget, the chamber pot wasn't just for emergencies. Some Victorians went ahead and pre-warmed theirs. That's right, you'd pour a little hot water in so the porcelain didn't shock you awake. A considerate touch, if slightly horrifying to imagine. Now let's drift to clothing. If you've ever seen an old Christmas card and thought, why is everyone in those nightcaps? That's real. Nightcaps were absolutely a thing, not just a cartoon stereotype. The idea was to keep your head warm, again because of the whole drafts will kill you obsession. But also, they helped tame hair. And in an era without daily showers, keeping your hair semi-under control overnight was basically a survival tactic. Nightshirts, too. If you were male, you wore a long, flowing shirt that looked suspiciously like a dress, and nobody cared. Everyone did it. Comfort over masculinity, apparently. Women, meanwhile, wore gowns that were not exactly Victoria's Secret chic. Think long, loose, flannel, layers if it was cold, basically the least flattering sleepwear imaginable. Which I guess is fine because when you're living in a London winter without central heating, fashion isn't your top priority. And socks. Oh yes, socks in bed. This wasn't optional. Cold toes were a legitimate Victorian crisis. People knit bed socks, padded slippers, even had little quilted foot cozies. There are records of people slipping hot bricks or heated pans wrapped in flannel under the covers before climbing in. Imagine spooning a hot brick at night. That's peak Victorian romance. Then came the health hacks. The Victorians were constantly anxious about sleep. Doctors churned out pamphlets about what you should and shouldn't do before bed. Don't eat too much. Don't drink too much. Don't read too much. Basically, don't enjoy anything. They were particularly worried about overstimulating the brain before bed, which is hilarious because these are the same people who also thought it was a great idea to sip a little opium syrup as a nightcap. Nothing says healthy sleep hygiene than laudanum, the Victorian version of NyQuil but with actual narcotics. Speaking of nightcaps, the drink kind, alcohol as a sleep aid was wildly popular. A glass of warm milk with brandy, a bit of sherry, maybe even straight gin if you were feeling particularly committed. Doctors were constantly flip-flopping on whether alcohol was helpful or disastrous for sleep. But of course, that never stopped anyone from indulging. And then there were the bizarre remedies. If you couldn't sleep, one common tip was to rub your temples with vinegar. Another was to put lettuce leaves under your pillow. And my personal favorite, sleeping with a piece of raw onion in your pocket. Because if you smelled like a salad, surely the Sandman would approve. And just when you thought the night was calm, we need to mention the Victorians and their sleep patterns. They weren't like us. Today, we're obsessed with 8 straight hours. Back then, segmented sleep was normal. People often slept in 2 shifts, first sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed around 9, wake up around midnight or 1, potter around for an hour or 2, maybe read, pray, even visit neighbors. Yes, middle-of-the-night social calls were a thing. Then you'd crawl back in for your second sleep until dawn. It sounds bizarre, but apparently it worked for them. Modern sleep scientists even think it might have been healthier in some ways. But still, can you imagine? Your neighbor shows up at 1:30 a.m. like, hey, just thought I'd stop by. No thanks. So, to recap our little nighttime routine. Blow out the lamps without catching your sleeves on fire. Pull the chamber pot into its discreet hiding place. Put on your floor-length nightshirt and cap. Maybe rub some vinegar on your face for science. Slide under 20 pounds of blankets, heat up your feet with a hot brick, and prepare to wake up in the middle of the night for a casual hangout before second sleep. That's the Victorian vibe. Half cozy, half ridiculous, fully committed to the idea that the night was dangerous and needed to be managed with 100 little rituals. And that's just scratching the surface, because we haven't even floated over to the more weirdly specific stuff, like what the Victorians thought about dream interpretation, or how they designed insane gadgets just for bedtime comfort, and the frankly bizarre ways they tried to make sleep more moral. But we'll drift into that in the next stretch. All right, we've tucked ourselves into a Victorian bed, hot brick snuggled by our feet, chamber pot politely lurking under the frame, and we're ready for what comes next, which, naturally, is dreams. Because of course the Victorians couldn't just leave sleep alone. They had to theorize, moralize, and occasionally panic about what went on in your head at night. Dreams were seen as windows to the soul, or messages from God, or just random indigestion, depending on which pamphlet you picked up. And Victorians loved pamphlets, whole little booklets about how to interpret your dreams. Dream dictionaries were wildly popular. If you dreamed about teeth falling out, that was either bad luck or just proof you should stop eating hard bread. If you dreamed of water, it might mean financial changes. And if you dreamed of pigs, congratulations. Apparently your subconscious was rooting for prosperity, or maybe just bacon. But here's where it gets extra Victorian. Dreams weren't just spiritual, they were moral. A bad dream might be proof that you'd been reading the wrong kind of book, or thinking impure thoughts, or even sitting too close to the fireplace, because, naturally, morality was tied into everything. Even your subconscious wasn't safe from judgment. Now, let's float from dreams to the realm of nighttime superstitions. The Victorians had a lot of them. Some were cozy, like putting lavender under your pillow to bring sweet sleep, which, honestly, we still do with essential oils, so I can't even mock that one. But then others veered into the seriously weird. For instance, mirrors. Mirrors in the bedroom were considered dangerous. Why? Because people believed they could trap your soul while you slept. Imagine drifting off and waking up to find your reflection had wandered off to start a new life without you. Slightly unsettling. Some families actually covered mirrors at night just to be safe. So if your room looked like a furniture showroom with bedsheet-covered glass, that was just your nightly insurance policy against a lost soul. Another one, clocks. Some households thought ticking clocks could disturb your rest, so they stopped them at night. Others claimed a clock stopping by itself was an omen of death, which, frankly, makes every Victorian bedroom sound like a horror movie set waiting to happen. And then there was the belief in night air. Victorians were terrified of it. Doctors warned against opening your windows after dark. Fresh air during the day was fine, healthy even, but at night, it transformed into something sinister. Invisible vapors, diseases floating around just waiting to crawl into your lungs. It was basically the boogeyman with extra humidity. So yes, they rather suffocate in their heavily curtained beds than crack a window, which, in hindsight, explains a lot about Victorian respiratory problems. But bedtime wasn't all superstition. It was also innovation. Victorians loved gadgets, and if they could invent something to make sleep better, they would. Which brings us to some of their fascinatingly bizarre bedtime contraptions. One of my favorites is the bed warming pan. Picture a shallow metal pan on a long handle filled with hot coals slid under the sheets to take the chill off. Cozy in theory, until you realize that dropping live embers into your bedding is basically asking to wake up inside a bonfire. So yes, accidents happened, but apparently a toasty mattress was worth the risk. Then came the hot water bottle revolution. Early versions weren't the rubber, squishy things we know. They were heavy ceramic jugs filled with boiling water, wrapped in fabric, and placed at the foot of the bed, essentially sleeping with a brick-shaped teapot. They worked surprisingly well until you rolled over and kicked one in the middle of the night. And if you were particularly elite, you might have had something even stranger, mechanical beds. Yes, the Victorians had prototypes of adjustable beds, springs, pulleys, and levers to raise you up or tilt you, the kind of thing we associate with modern hospital furniture, except these were advertised as luxury, the height of comfort science. Imagine explaining to your butler that you want to be angled 30 degrees to improve your digestion tonight. Speaking of digestion, Victorians obsessed over it. They believed your stomach directly dictated your dreams. Too much heavy food at dinner and you were in for a nightmare. Doctors warned against rich puddings late at night, which was frankly unfair because Victorian puddings were amazing. But stomach anxiety ran deep. Some households had strict rules about what you could eat after 6 p.m., usually something bland like porridge, bread, or weak tea. And yet, these same people often capped off the night with opium tinctures, chloroform inhalers, or straight brandy, which really makes you wonder how much the nightmare problem was just, chemical choices. But to them, it was all about balance. Don't overstimulate the belly. Keep the body calm. Take a sedative if you must, and try not to die of laudanum overdose. Simple. Now, let's wander to the social side of Victorian nights, because bedtime wasn't just a personal routine, it was practically a stage performance. Especially in wealthier homes, bedrooms doubled as semi-public spaces. You might receive visitors in your bedroom, lounging in bed while dressed in your fanciest dressing gown like you were some kind of horizontal monarch. This was especially common in France and spread into England as a fashionable trend. Imagine inviting your friends over and just lying in bed while you chatted. Very casual, very weird. But on the flip side, there were also strict moral codes about sleep. Nighttime wasn't just for rest. It was for reflection, self-discipline, prayer.
Manuals reminded young women to examine their conscience before bed, asking themselves if they had sinned that day by, say, being too vain with their hairstyle or reading a novel instead of scripture. Yes, even your pillow talk with yourself had to be morally supervised. Children especially were drilled into these routines, evening prayers, Bible readings, moral lessons, all before sleep. And don't even think about storytelling that wasn't approved. Fairy tales were sometimes frowned upon for being too fantastical, because apparently imagination at bedtime was suspicious. Better to drift off dreaming of proper virtues than, fun. But of course, in practice, people were still people. Letters and diaries from the era show plenty of bedtime rebellion, sneaking novels under the covers with a candle stub, whispering gossip across shared beds, even the occasional teenager slipping out of the house after first sleep to meet someone in the garden, which is oddly comforting. Turns out, sneaky night behavior is timeless. One thing we haven't touched yet is noise. The Victorian night wasn't quiet. Without insulated walls or double glazing, every creak and sound carried. You'd hear your neighbors coughing, the horses clopping down cobblestones, the endless ringing of church bells marking the hours, and if you lived in the city, the industrial background hum that never really stopped. People often wrote about how restless nights were, and yet silence itself could also be unsettling. Too much quiet meant something was wrong. So the rhythm of nighttime noise became part of the sleep landscape. Some people actually added sound, music boxes, soft singing, or servants reading aloud to lull their employers. Yes, if you were wealthy enough, you could outsource your bedtime story. Nothing like drifting to sleep while your maid recites the latest serialized Dickens novel. Luxury, I guess. Let's glide now into the realm of dream control, because the Victorians really wanted to hack their subconscious. Whole guides promised ways to shape your dreams. Eat certain foods, place symbolic objects under your pillow, say specific prayers, all in the hope of engineering a dream about a loved one, or even predicting the future. One popular superstition was placing a Bible under your pillow. Supposedly, it kept away nightmares. Others swore by slipping love letters under there, so you dream of your sweetheart. And then there were people who put knives or scissors beneath their pillows as protection against evil spirits. Nothing says restful slumber than knowing you're lying 2 inches above a sharp blade. And yet, through all this, what strikes me most is how seriously Victorians took sleep. It wasn't just the thing you did because you were tired, it was a moral act, a medical act. A ritual infused with superstition, science, class signaling, and more than a little paranoia. Bedtime wasn't just about rest, it was about identity. Who you were, what you believed, and what you could afford, all wrapped up in one long, drawn-out nightly performance. So, we've made it through dreams, superstitions, gadgets, and the general ambiance of Victorian nights. Next, let's drift over to the intimate details. Things like personal hygiene before bed, cosmetics, the role of servants in preparing someone for sleep, and the endlessly weird Victorian obsession with regulating every single bodily habit.
Hygiene, cosmetics, and the bedtime production team. So, we've set the bed, arranged our chamber pot, rubbed ourselves down with vinegar for some reason, and taken our nightly laudanum shot. But before actually crawling under the covers, the Victorians had one more category of ritual: hygiene, because, unsurprisingly, they were a little obsessed with cleanliness. Now, let's clarify. When I say cleanliness, I don't mean they were showering every night like us with our 12-step skincare routines. Nope. The Victorian version of clean was, let's call it, minimalist. Baths were usually once a week, sometimes once a month, if water was scarce or if you were just lazy. Daily washing meant a basin of water and a sponge, called a sponge bath. It was the old-school equivalent of a wet wipe. Quick, efficient, and nowhere near thorough. Before bed, people often did a light wash of the face and hands, maybe the feet, especially if you'd been walking around in London, which was essentially a giant outdoor mud pit spiced with horse manure. Soap was common, but gentle scented soaps were a luxury. Cheaper households made do with harsh lye-based soap that stripped your skin faster than any modern chemical peel. And then there was the teeth situation. Toothbrushes did exist, made of bone or wood handles with hog bristles, but not everyone used them regularly. Many just rubbed their teeth with a rag dipped in salt or soot. Yes, soot, because nothing says fresh breath than chimney residue. For those who did use toothpaste, it might include chalk, crushed shells, or even brick dust. Imagine ending your day scrubbing your teeth with literal rocks. Dental hygiene was less about minty freshness and more about grit removal. Still, Victorians were concerned with nighttime breath. Manuals advised rinsing the mouth before bed, especially for ladies, because apparently waking up with offensive breath was seen as a moral failing. Nothing like starting the day already judged. Skincare also got its share of attention. Especially ladies had bedtime beauty rituals. Cold creams, often made with animal fat and rosewater, were massaged onto the face. Lemon juice was used to lighten freckles, and sometimes arsenic wafers were eaten for a clear complexion, which, spoiler, was not a great long-term strategy. Nothing like glowing pale skin achieved by slowly poisoning yourself. Some women wore gloves or socks filled with ointments overnight to soften the skin. Men, too, had a few grooming habits before bed. Oiling their mustaches or brushing their beards so they didn't wake up looking like a startled badger. It's always the little details. Now, if you were wealthy, you didn't necessarily do all this yourself. Enter the servant brigade. The whole bedtime routine could be an actual production. Ladies had maids who brushed out their hair, 100 strokes, because that was supposed to make it glossy and strong. Maids helped them undress, unlace corsets, fold dresses, fetch water, set out night clothes, and warm the bed. Gentlemen had valets who performed similar services, minus the corset untying, unless they were particularly adventurous. And this wasn't optional. A lady of status being seen fiddling with her own laces or pouring her own basin water was practically a scandal. The point of wealth was outsourcing even the most mundane parts of life, including tucking yourself in. Of course, servants themselves didn't have this luxury. Their own bedtime routines were minimal. Maybe a quick wipe down if there was water left, maybe not. Their beds were often tucked into cramped attic spaces, shared, with thin blankets and no warming pans. The contrast was stark. While the lady of the house was drifting off on goose feather pillows, her maid might be shivering under a single wool blanket, just a floor above. Let's glide a little deeper into the psychological part of bedtime, because Victorians loved nothing more than moral self-examination. Manuals insisted you should end your day with a review of your actions. Did you gossip? Did you covet your neighbor's fancy umbrella? Did you have an impure thought about the butcher's apprentice? If yes, time to repent before sleep, because God might decide to call you home during the night and you did not want to be caught with sinful thoughts in your dream journal. This meant prayer was almost mandatory. Entire families sometimes gathered to pray before bed. Children knelt at the bedside, reciting memorized lines about angels watching them through the night. Adults read Bible passages, and diaries often mentioned falling asleep with scripture still in hand, which sounds serene, if a little performative. Now, here's something delightfully weird. Victorians were very concerned about the position you slept in. Doctors gave advice on the proper sleeping posture. Some said lying on the left side compressed the heart and was therefore dangerous. Others claimed lying on the right side aided digestion. Still others insisted sleeping flat on your back was the only civilized option, though it came with warnings about inviting nightmares. So basically, no matter how you lay down, someone was convinced it was wrong. They even tied morality into it. Upright posture in bed, with extra pillows, was seen as dignified, while sprawling face down was considered lazy and animal-like. Yes, even unconscious body language got moralized. You couldn't win. And since we're floating in these bedrooms anyway, let's talk about the atmosphere. Smells were big. People burned incense or used sachets filled with herbs like lavender, rosemary, or chamomile. These weren't just for nice aromas, they were believed to purify the air. Because again, night air was scary, and only lavender could save you. Bed sheets were often spritzed with vinegar, which sounds horrifying, but was thought to disinfect. Imagine climbing into bed and smelling like a pickle jar. Cozy. For the wealthy, perfumes were also part of the nightly routine. Dabbing a little floral scent before bed was seen as genteel, because of course you needed to smell fancy while unconscious. Porter households stuck to herbs tucked under pillows, or maybe nothing at all. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortably Victorian. They were obsessed with regulating sexuality at night. Manuals warned young men about the dangers of self-abuse in bed. Whole pamphlets claimed it would drain your vitality, ruin your complexion, and possibly shorten your lifespan. Doctors prescribed sleeping with hands tied or wearing spiked devices to discourage temptation, or sleeping in cold, hard beds as a cure. It was a full-blown panic wrapped up in morality and pseudoscience. For women, the warnings were more subtle but just as controlling. They were cautioned against too much physical closeness, even with their own husbands. Sleep was supposed to be pure, restorative, and above all, disciplined, which is a very Victorian way of saying no fun allowed. And yet, despite all this rigid morality, there are plenty of little diary notes and private letters suggesting people did exactly what they wanted once the lights went out. Couples still cuddled, flings still happened, and servants definitely knew more about their employers' nighttime activities than anyone cared to admit. The manuals painted one picture, but real life was always messier, which is probably why people bought the manuals in the first place, to pretend they were better behaved than they actually were. So let's gather where we are. You've washed your face with soap that could strip paint, brushed your teeth with chalk, slathered your skin in animal fat and lemon juice, let your maid brush your hair until it resembled a horse's mane, said a quick prayer to cover for that impure thought about the butcher's apprentice, and now are lying rigidly on your right side, surrounded by lavender sachets and vinegar fumes, hoping the night air doesn't kill you. If that doesn't sound like the coziest sleep of your life, I don't know what does. And yet, bedtime was still only part of the story, because the Victorians also had entire nighttime cultures beyond the bedroom. Midnight snacks, nighttime reading habits, even night workers and insomniacs had their own unique routines. And of course, there were the endless medical debates about insomnia itself, what caused it and how to cure it.